Following podcast is intended for an adult audience only. It contains strong language, strong accents, strong opinions, and themes of a sexual nature. So if you're under 18 or difficult to please, this isn't the podcast for you.
Welcome to Varying Degrees, a BDSM podcast. I am your host, called Handads, aka Hans, and beside me this evening is my co-host, as ever. Good evening, Burns. How you doing, mate?
I'm alright, aye. I'm not so bad. What about yourself? What have you been up to lately?
Well, it's all go, isn't it? I mean, events have pretty much started up fully in person now. So I think since we last spoke and since we had Growley on last time to talk about rope, I've actually managed to get myself over to a peer rope group. Munches are in full swing. I think we had almost a record turnout last week, and everything's go with Cool Hand Floggers as usual because, you know, I keep myself busy. But we've just launched a range of wax play candles. One of my partners has been working really hard through lockdown to nail down exactly what she wanted, wanted in a product, and what she thought consumers would want in a product and what we'd want if we were buying them. And she actually launched them this weekend, which is actually not going to be this weekend by the time we publish this, of course. So she launched them back at the mid-November point. But yeah, so go, mate. You know what it's like with me. I'm always like to keep myself busy. What about yourself? How are you and your partner doing? Have you been keeping busy? Have you got to anything recently?
Everything's kind of on hold at the minute because we're looking at buying a place. But we've got a rope workshop intensive in December, which is going to focus on suspension. So looking forward to that, and kind of getting back into things, and getting back to Munches when we can, So it's good to see that things have kind of started up again. And it's funny that we mentioned rope, actually. It was because our guest tonight has previously been involved in the London rope scene, but that's not what we're getting him on to talk about tonight. So we have Will Hunt joining us tonight, and it's going to be grand.
I'm really, really excited because, as you mentioned, Will Hunt has been involved in the rope scene. I mean, I'm sure he's going to correct me or fill in the gaps in a bit, but, I know that he was previously based in the Birmingham kink scene, and I know that he's now based in the London kinks. One of the things I'm most excited about is I know that Will has also hosted or ran a advanced interrogation workshop. So as we dig into the subject of sadism and maybe edge play and talk about emotional sadism later on in the episode, I'm really interested to hear how maybe his experiences with the interrogation stuff. So I'm like champing it a bit. But anyway, without further ado, Will Hunt, thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. Thanks for having me on, and thank you for such a lovely introduction.
No, you're absolutely welcome, mate. It's a pleasure to have you here. Like I say, I'm really excited to get you on. I missed one of your workshops that was I believe you're still based slightly more up north at the time, but you ran a interrogation workshop in Reading a few years back, and I just about missed out on tickets for that one.
Tickets are a bit hard to come by. Yeah, we keep that particular workshop. It's limited to no more than 10 couples, and we only teach it twice a year. It's a very intensive workshop, and so we it can be one of those like you kind of blink and miss it, unfortunately. It seems to have built up a rather, I don't know, a good or a bad reputation. I'm not sure which is the right way of referring to it. I suppose amongst sadists, a bad reputation can be a good thing. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, no, I mean, it's great to have you here. And like I say, I mean, I'm sure we might touch on it where it interplays with sadism potentially. But we're not going to talk about one of the things that keeps you busiest, which is rope. And I've seen some of your rope. It's absolutely lovely.
Oh, cheers.
But yeah, we're going to talk about sadism and consensual sadism, maybe how you go about, gaining that consent. And I know you wrote an article which actually touched on something that I personally dealt with about 10 years ago and sort of just had to deal with it alone and internally. An article that was aimed at sort of newer sadists about kind of acceptance and how to untangle the feelings around, essentially hurting somebody that's in your care.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a complicated one to navigate emotionally, because I think most good sadists are the sadists who do feel a little bit bad about it. But it can be slightly reassuring when you have an emotional reaction and that self-doubt. And I personally take that as a rather positive sign. Because if someone's sadistic and doesn't care, I think there you're really at a far greater risk of, hurting someone seriously and potentially morally not really being the best kind of person. So I think it's actually really good to, when you first start exploring sadism, to worry about it and to kind of question whether it's okay or not. So I think I'd much rather that most of us start out with a bit of self-doubt than absolute confidence that it's totally fine and we should just go for it straight away.
I think as well, it's always easier to add more, but it's always, well, I was going to say difficult. You can't take it back once you've crossed the line and gone too far. You can always say, oh, well, we can do a bit more next time. But if someone said, actually, that was too much and that's enough, and I don't want to do this anymore, then, you can regain the trust and all, but yeah, you can't dial it back in the moment,
I totally agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah. It's far better to end a scene with someone and have them say, oh, you could have gone harder or we could have done more, than have someone say you did too much or it went too far. I think you're always far better off playing well under a limit than slightly over it.
Aye. And just briefly, and I know we mentioned about consent, and I think there was something that we said we'll mention and then move on. There's certain acts which, in the eyes of the law, you can't consent to. So I know when people start talking about edge play, they'll say that obviously, but legally speaking, you couldn't use consent as a defence in court if it went that far. But we'll not discuss that for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's kind of outside the scope of what we wanted to discuss anyway. But also, you can't really comment on ongoing cases, But I did think that you, when we spoke before briefly, you did say that you were going to discuss the topics of consent and edge play to a degree, but you're focusing on it in a slightly different manner.
Yeah, I would hesitate to offer any sort of advice that even sounded vaguely legal. It's not my area of expertise. There are some incredibly skilled and dedicated legal experts who have worked in this area. I talk about it simply from an interpersonal perspective. And I'm quite a libertarian when it comes to the idea of the autonomy of the individual. And so I will only speak about it from a personal perspective and a one-to-one perspective. And if anything I suggest or recommend or any story I tell you would legally cross any line, then it's just a joke and I don't mean it. Okay? So that's us covered, right? We're all good? Yeah, all clear.
Yeah.
All sorted.
Yeah, that's our disclaimer done. So, you say you'd only ever talk about it from your own experience, just for us as much as, because we don't really know each other. So for us as much as the listener, where did you start and how did you get to the point today where you're teaching? I know that focuses a lot on vote, but how did you get to the point where you're teaching? Where you're invited to come on podcasts like this to speak about sadism, where you're occasionally writing articles about sadism, and I believe you've got some YouTube videos about bits and pieces as well within DS and MS and Power Exchange. How did you get to the point where you feel you have a personal experience that can support other people?
Sure. I think for me, I started becoming aware that I might have some value to add to these discussions when people were talking about things as a new experience to them that I recognized as part of a journey I'd been through. And so when people were discussing these kind of insecurities or how to find the nuance of consent within kind of consent, non-consent, and how to still be able to be scary to their partner but still also keep them safe. And those kind of conversations were being had. And I realized these were conversations that I'd already had with people more experienced myself. And they shared really valuable information with me. Or they were things that I'd been through myself already as well and found what has proven so far anyway to be positive ways of engaging with those. And so that was kind of what made me think, right, I think I can share some ideas with people that might be helpful. And I'm a big believer in, wherever possible, making new mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. The goal is to make brand new ones each time. So not to repeat the same mistakes. So you want to always be trying to learn, always be trying to kind of evolve what you're doing. And where possible, learn from other people who've made mistakes so you don't repeat those either. And so if we work together, we can help each of us to kind of refine how we do this kind of sadism thing, this DS thing, this rope thing, whatever it may be, but to refine it by learning from each other's mistakes so that we can hopefully make brand new ones that then we can tell other people and help them avoid. And so I think, yeah, it's that kind of, seeing people talking about things I've been through or things I'd asked, and then also the fact that I've managed to come up with some brand new mistakes of my own that I want to be able to share with people as well.
I think that's a really great point, and also I think it's great that you mentioned about learning from others on the scene. So I think that kind of goes back to something that Hans and I have been kind of trying to emphasise on the podcast: the value of going to events or your local munch or whatever and talking to people and really getting the benefit of that expertise that is out there already,
And it doesn't even have to be somebody who would consider themselves to have expertise, I don't think. I've learned so much from just talking to peers at social events and then sort of going away and reflecting on their experience or our conversation. And through that reflection, then being able to sort of foster some growth or some development or some new ideas or go to a conversation with a slightly different point of view next time. I know a lot of people that I've got a great deal of insight from, and they probably don't even realise they've provided that insight, to be fair.
I think the community is really valuable for people who want to learn how to do things. And rather than use kind of terminologies like top, bottom, sadist, masochist, we can look at it in terms of the people who want to do things and the people who want stuff done to them. And as the people who are interested in doing the thing, there are skills that we need to pick up. There are technical aspects as well as kind of the psychological aspect. I think the community serves a real function there for us to be able to, as people wanting to do things, to pick up ideas from others, to pick up skills, to learn theoretical as well as practical. And so I think that being kind of a doer within a community exposes you to some really good information, some good dialogue, and also ideas that you wouldn't have had by yourself for things you can try out, which was always great. It's always like to come up with new, surprise, terrible things to do to people.
I had a great one once. I was at a munch, and there was a particular person who I won't name, but they said that one of the ways they punished one of their subs was to make them listen to a speech by someone from a political party that was the opposite of their chosen allegiance, as it were, and to write an essay on why they agreed with 3 points from that speech. And it seems quite funny in a way, okay, that's quite interesting. That's quite a creative way of doing it. But also, I think that was quite nice for me because it busted a myth that all sadism is necessarily violent. A lot of people will talk about impact play and various other things, but as I'm sure you're willing to expand on, sadism is so much more than that.
I can vouch for that because before I even identified as a sadist, there was something I've often been in, into ethical non-monogamy and had more casual partners than serious long-term committed ones. And I used to do a thing where I used to have this silver cocktail shaker, the sort of thing I mean. It almost looks like an urn. And I used to have it up on a shelf. And when I would have, and this is terrible, I'd like to preface this by saying I've grown a lot, but I've learned a lot, and I would never do this now because it's just cruel. But you know what? It sounds like I'm making excuses. It was really early in my journey to self-discovery. It's probably maybe in my early 20s, and I'd have a partner over, and I would get the cocktail shaker down from the shelf, and it was silver and it was solid, and I'd look at it and I'd just smile and tilt my head to one side and sort of stroke it or pat it, and sometimes I go nan like that, and they'd say, well, that's my nan's urn. And their face would kind of, because it'd be a casual partner but wouldn't know me very well, and they would get really awkward. And then I would change all the time, but I would spin a line like, nobody else will have her in the house because of the terrible things she said, or, she put a curse on our family in her last days. And looking after us were falling upon me, and I would hold it, and then I would sort of take a step towards them to hand it to them, and I would watch them recoil in horror. And that's horrible. I admit now, as a more formed human being, sort of maybe 15 years later, but that's a horrible thing to do. But I used to get off on their squirming. To me it was a joke. I didn't even think of it as sadism. I thought of it as a joke. But what I was getting off on in hindsight was their struggle, and it makes I put my hands up. I'm a horrible human being. But it just reinforces that not all suffering is physical, and the pleasure we derive from suffering isn't always physical suffering. It's kind of that satisfaction of watching people squirm. And you can hate me, and I probably won't be welcome in my local community after admitting that.
It seems the line between sadist and practical joker is a very thin one, it seems. But that makes me think of a conversation I had very, very recently, actually, at one of the events in the Midlands, with a younger person new to the scene, and I were discussing this aspect of sadism. And I actually said that I'm not a sadist. What I am is I am interested in provoking responses. That it's far more empathically orientated. What I enjoy are people's reactions. Sadism is a name effectively for a school of activities which provoke a response. And those responses are normally what we would label as like negative responses, their pain response, their fear responses, whatever they are. But I am interested in the person's response and that heightened state. And one of the methods of achieving that falls under the terms of sadism. And so I think we often look at sadism too narrowly as an all-encompassing thing. Whereas sometimes it is what we're interested in is the responses and this heightened state of consciousness that we provoke in our partners and kind of vicariously experience for ourselves. I mean, vast swathes of human history have been about us trying to find altered states of consciousness, whether that's through narcotics, through dancing and chanting around a fire, or by that heightened state of fear and fight response. So we love, one of our human activities is altering the way our brain perceives things. And I think what we're doing in a lot of cases is we're doing that. But some of the methods we employ fall under the terms of sadistic, or on the other side, masochistic. And these have a lot of negative connotations that are drawn with it. But from my understanding, that is simply one of the schools of method that can be employed to achieve this heightened state of consciousness in our partners, and for us to also enjoy and kind of vicariously experience ourselves as well.
Also, I'm reminded there of a joke. It's a sadist and a masochist in a dungeon together. The masochist says, "Hit me, hit me, hit me." Sadist says, "No." The masochist says, "Oh, thank you." And that joke was told to me by my religious studies teacher when I was in secondary school. It was a Catholic secondary school. Make of that what you will.
Yeah, that's not surprising. I think a lot of us kind of trace our kind of early kink awakening moments to high schools or religious indoctrination of some level or another. But yeah, that it's a kind of a wonderful truth within the joke. Is what is it that people are enjoying? What is it they're getting off on? And we, at the very beginning, you discussed that kind of sadism being not just physical, that it can also be entirely emotional, psychological. But I suppose I expand that out as well. If you're stepping up to just that school of techniques that you list under sadism, it's about whatever methodology you use to provoke these altered states, these heightened states, these kind of endorphin-filled moments that we enjoy. And for some people, that is kind of physical impact. For other people, it's the feeling scared. For some people, it's the feeling safe. And so all of these are these altered states, these heightened states, these super aware states. And sadism is just one tool that we can use. And I think, unfortunately, because, again, it does have a lot of negative connotations that get carried with it, it's one that we're warned off of. And so I think as a young person, starting to get into kink and being interested in how do I produce these states in my partner, one of them that is quite kind of, in a way, easy to do is sadism. Whereas it's spanking someone on the butt. It's, being scary. Those are some things that we play at very easily. But it's also what we're told we should never feel or never want to never do. It's bad to do it.
And do you think it's the taboo that is one of the driving forces of why we do?
Absolutely. I think you can see wonderful kind of cultural as well as generational shifts in the types of sadism or the types of kink that are popular and pervasive in kind of the subcultures, in the fashion, and it's often tied into what is not okay of the time. And so the idea of being sexually aware and possessed and enjoying sexuality might be wildly taboo in one area. And so that becomes the area that you play in more. So the sadistic way of playing that might be making someone actually enjoy what's happening and being ashamed of the fact they enjoy it. And so within that culture, it's sadistic of me to make my partner have multiple orgasms and love it, because then I can call her a filthy little slut the whole time while she's having a great time. It's sadistic of me. But in another culture where that's not the case, that's not sadistic anymore.
So that's kind of going more towards the degradation and humiliation side of things. Would you consider degradation and humiliation the tools of a sadist or sadistic play, emotional sadism?
I think that for me, it would if the person I'm doing it to finds it sadistic. So for me, it's actually it's identified, the definition depends on the person receiving. They're the one who, in many cases, decides whether it's bad good or good or bad, because what I'm doing could be the same thing, but depending on the person I'm doing it with, it can vary wildly what the kind of the reaction is. It's like if you've got some people, I've played with people before, and I have a certain reputation. People come to me and they want to play, and they will say things like, I'm not really like hardcore masochistic. I can't like take a lot of being caned or something like that, for example. And I'll tell them that doesn't matter. For me, what I enjoy is not hitting you as hard as I want to hit you. What I enjoy is your reaction. And so I want to hit you to the level that provokes a reaction. So it's not that I have an abstract. It's not that I derive pleasure from swinging my arm at a certain rate and with a certain force. I derive my pleasure from the reactions I get from you. And so because of that, a lot of what I think of as sadistic at the time would depend a great deal on who I'm doing it with.
It's the difference between whether you commit an act and your bottom laughs and giggles, or if you commit an act or say something and they blush and turn away in shame, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think for us in that beginning journey of recognizing oneself as having sadistic tendencies, and again, I am aware that I'm somewhat mudding certain terms, because it can seem very clear when you say sadistic. Everyone just thinks of the basic kind of hitty, bad, doing bad things to people things. But when you actually are working with a consensual BDSM framework, nothing is actually really bad if it's all being consented to and everyone's agreeing and everyone's conscientious of what they're doing. So it becomes slightly muddled just by that fact. But I think the moment of realization in oneself, when we go, I am okay doing things to someone else that society or my kind of moral construct that I've had kind of taught to me tells me I should not do. And that, I think, is the sadistic struggle. Because when it's rare, and it takes a bit of time really, it takes a while for there to be less than 3 people in a scene. Because often it'll be me, the person I'm doing it with, and then whatever moral authority is telling me I shouldn't be doing it. And for a lot of us at the very beginning, it can be that idea of like, oh, I'm a bad person for enjoying this. But you're enjoying it. The person you're doing it with is enjoying it. So who is telling you that you're bad? And that's that voice. There's that time that we have to spend with ourselves of working out where we've taken that on board from. And does it have a purpose? Does it actually serve any value here? So I think that early struggle is often with that third voice. And it can be an enemy or it can be a friend. But if you engage with it positively, it becomes that kind of, that safety valve, that safety kind of, that lifeguard monitor voice that just kind of makes you double check everything a little bit. Like, it's good it's there, because it kind of goes, it says, oh, are you sure they're enjoying it? You're like, no, that's a good question. I have to make sure they're all on board for this. But on the other side of it, it's telling you, that's bad, you're bad, they're bad for enjoying it, you're all terrible people, you should stop everything. And that's the bad side of it. But the voice is going to be there. It's how much of a friend can you make of it?
And I think it's that voice that leads me to the only time I as a top need aftercare, because, you know, drop and the aftermath of a scene can be, for a bottom, can be partly caused by the altered chemical state that we induce through the play that we do. You know, the chemistry, you know, the, endorphins, dopamine, etc. But as a top, I'm very generalising here, and I'm talking from personal experience, less likely to experience that. But after a particularly heavy scene, what I may experience is that voice and that niggling at the back of the head. And actually not so much now, but certainly after heavier scenes in the past. And that's when I've needed a version of aftercare for me. And it's simply been a reassurance that my bottom has had a good time, that they are okay, that, you know, that everything that we've done is what we agreed, and it's all been all right, despite the fact that they were sobbing and I was snarling like a beast and leering over them and dragging them out, whatever it might be, you know. And that is the only time I've experienced the need for a bit of aftercare myself, like, you know, when that little voice is niggling at the back of my head.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point to emphasize, is that tops can need aftercare as well. Tops can also safe word. Tops can have limits. We are people. We are complex. We have things that we like, we don't like. We have concerns about ourselves. We have concerns about others. It's absolutely vital, I think, that we recognize that in of ourselves, that even if we are playing the character, we can play the remorseless monster. It's really valuable to recognize and be honest with ourselves and with the other people that are involved in this. Well, that we are people. We have concerns, we have self-doubts, we have worries. We may need someone to reassure us afterwards. And I think that's really valuable. And there's a trust aspect that does go both ways. That we're asking the bottom to trust us with a great deal. And that can be physical as well as mental and emotional. And that we, I think, really should show them the respect of trusting them in return as well. And being honest that we are a person as well.
So that's actually quite interesting that you mentioned aftercare there, mentioned a couple of times. I suppose it's kind of a question especially pertinent with a lot of current discussions around both toxic masculinity and male mental health. So it's not to be sexist, but covering the general perception that a lot of DOMs are male, and also usually white, able-bodied and ruthlessly heterosexual. Would you say that there's a concern among tops, perhaps, as a better term than DOMs because of the associated images there, but perhaps a concern among tops of saving face almost, and not admitting that they need aftercare?
I think so. Yeah, I think there is some toxicity in the scene that perhaps is somewhat unique to the scene, in the sense that a lot of tops seem to have an idea of what they're supposed to be, and therefore something they try to hold themselves up to. And that can be, you know, the uber dom type of always being in control, always being in charge, always being, you know, a bit emotionally distant. I mean, it seems like a lot of the stereotype ideas that people outside the scene have of tops within the scene then get perpetuated by those people who enter the scene with those expectations. So I think if you come to the scene later in life, you've been fed a narrative which is normally intentionally negative because it's been produced external of the community to project and to, I suppose, give a negative connotation to it. And then you think that's what the case is. So you then enter the scene and you try to live up to what you think is the expected standard.
Yeah, I've got a theory around that. A lot of the sort of bad behaviour that we see online usually from white heterosexual males in terms of the sort of comments or sort of messages that get sent to submissives. I have a little bit of a theory around that although there are loads of really douchey guys out there who just don't have the right approach and don't even care to learn the right approach, I also believe there is a sizable fraction of people that are taking that approach through lack of education because they think I am a male dom. This is what I should be doing. This is how I should be approaching. I know some people have agreed with me and just gone, no, any adult would know that isn't the right approach and that you shouldn't do that. But I think that when you go onto a site like FL and there are other sites as well, and you see a lot of Instagrams one for stereotypical, well-created profiles that set off a certain image, that you join these as a dom or a master or however you want to identify, and you feel that you see what's going on and what's happening, and you think, oh, that's how I need to be. That's how I need to be to fulfill the role. And yeah, there's going to be people out there who are just toxic douchebags. That's always a given. But I'm convinced that there are just some uneducated, misled people as well who take a really piss poor approach because of it.
I would be inclined not to call it a lack of education, but perhaps a miseducation, more accurately, as Jesus, I'm not a prude and I'm certainly not anti-pornography, but you do wonder sometimes if a lot of these negative stereotypes come from pornography, particularly the more violent gonzo end, where it is particularly violent, and that people are exposed to this and see this, and like you say, then think, oh right, that's what this is supposed to be. So I wouldn't really say that there's a lack of education. It's just that the education that people are getting is perhaps not the most appropriate.
I think that it's symptomatic of a lot of social media issues, which is you are seeing people at the most kind of perfect state. And so everyone on their kind of FL profile, anyone on their kinky Instagram or TikTok will be showing you the best moments. It's the highlight reel. And so as a young person exploring your sadist side, you're drawn to sadistic acts. You're drawn to kind of sadistic kind of visuals, and you look at them and they're always at their most kind of refined moment. What you don't see is the kind of months of relationship beforehand between the two people involved, the negotiations, the conversations, the after. You just see the moment at the most extreme. And if you aren't part of a community, if you aren't engaging in the dialogue and learning what actually goes into this, and you're just coming at it from the outside, then it does seem like everyone just goes straight into that. There was a big munch in London, and it was a huge get-together. It was quite a welcoming one as well. And you'd have 100, 150 people at this thing. And it was a lot of new people to the scene as well. And I'd been on the scene for a while. I was friends with a lot of the people at that gathering. And at one of these, there are a couple of my female friends who I knew, who I played with, who I had a relationship with, who I basically had an ongoing dynamic with. And so I could walk over to them, and I did. I'd walk over to them, and I'd literally smack them on the butt. Because that's part of the relationship we had. It was playful, it was consensual, it's something we did, it's something they did to me. It was totally within our kind of relationship structure. But for someone new to the scene, what they were seeing was a large dominant male walking up to two scantily clad women and smacking them right on the butt without even saying hello to them yet. So if they're just watching and not talking, the lesson they've learned there is that it's okay to treat what look like submissive women like objects if you're a dominant male. And so I think a lot of them, they'll watch and they're learning from what they see, but what they're missing is all the nuance and the layers and the subtlety and the everything else that goes into this that isn't obvious in a picture or in a moment of watching how two people interact at a single place. It doesn't give the depth of kind of work that goes into making that safe, making sure everyone involved is a consenting, informed adult. And so I think there is a real risk there of people on one side, as you said, potentially learning the wrong things, and the other side potentially learning nothing at all.
I think as well, it's interesting to consider that there are going to be people out there who might struggle to learn those nuances and the social pattern recognition. You know, like for instance, if you've got someone with autism or Asperger's or whatever, they're going to struggle with that social pattern recognition. So you kind of have to, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's an excuse for bad behaviour, right? But you have to kind of, which I think is kind of what you're saying there. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you have to retain some level of compassionate understanding, you know, that not everyone is going to get it and understand straight away. So you do maybe benefit of the doubt's kind of the wrong way of putting it, but you know, you have to be aware that people aren't going to instantly know what's okay and what isn't okay. So you do have to kind of be patient with them while you're trying to help them to learn.
I think that on some level, we have a responsibility in the community, especially as those heteronormative, cis white male looking people, to try and proactively provide access to better education. Because there's unfortunate reality that a lot of self-growth and discovery comes from the suffering of the victim. And you have a lot of this narrative of, oh, this is my personal journey of growth, which is actually my personal journey of traumatizing other people, and then me finding out that was bad. And it's like, well, that is really a terrible way to grow at the cost of so many others. But it is often how we do. So I think, again, that's where we have a responsibility to proactively present ourselves as accessible entities to dialogue. It's, again, one of the reasons I started writing, and one of the reasons I try and do very accessible workshops. I do a lot of kind of free educational stuff as well, is to try and give a way in for people who wanted to access someone, wanted to ask questions, wanted to get to know their local community. And one of the things that myself and others who are kind of known in the community do is try to be there for those people if they make a mistake, so they don't then become embittered or isolated. Because often when we have those senses of guilt or shame, when we realize we have hurt someone else and we didn't mean to, if that is reacted to with, more of that negativity, it can isolate people and make them worse. But also it isn't the responsibility of the person who has been victimized by that to then help that person grow. It's not their responsibility to do that. So I think where possible, we as the kind of community and certain figures within the community who perhaps represent those kind of people who often are the ones who mess up and hurt others, it's our job to try and, where possible, proactively intervene or engage to help minimize that risk for everyone. So there can be a healthier, happier community with people who understand the importance of consent, who understand the complexity of the nuance of the engagement, and also are self-aware enough to know that potentially they will struggle more, for whatever reason they may personally have, with understanding these nuanced social cues that some of us might just take for granted.
Right, thank you for that. I think that's really important to get out there. One of the things I was kind of going to wheel back around to as well again was aftercare. I know we spoke about it a little bit earlier, and I'm aware, of course, that aftercare is an acutely personal thing, and what works for one won't necessarily work for another. But and this is a question for both of you, I suppose. Like, what do you kind of recommend for aftercare for tops essentially. 'Cause, I mean, a lot of us think about what we can do for a bottom, you know, and providing that safety. Like, I mean, for instance, I generally identify as a bottom, especially on a rope. So, you know, you sort of think, okay, well, I just a cuddle and a bit of chocolate or something, you know, just to bring it back up. But what about tops? What works? What doesn't work?
You go first, Will. Go on. You take this one first, buddy.
Okay, well, I'll speak first personally and then perhaps more generally. So for me, a great deal of what gives me comfort and security after an intense scene is knowing my bottom's okay. So because a lot of my concern will be around, are they all right? What actually does a great deal of kind of aftercare for me is providing aftercare for them. And spending time with them, making sure they're okay, makes me feel better. Because if they're safe, then that's like the first concern out of the way. And the first kind of personal doubt or worry I might have is dealt with. I know the person that this has happened to, that I've done this to, is okay. Good. I can let that kind of, that voice that may be negative, that can settle. Beyond that, kind of more generally, what we can often find is, for some of us, it's that kind of just that reassurance of love and connection, is we want to make sure that people still love us even though we're bad. Because that's the wonderful contradiction inherently contained within it, is that we are bad to people we love because they love us being bad to them. But we still need to know they still love us for us. And so sometimes there is that just emotional security that we need to be reaffirmed and to counteract that kind of third voice that we spoke about, that voice that's telling us we're morally corrupt or reprehensible. We need someone there to reassure us that voice isn't telling us the truth.
I would completely agree with everything you said, to be fair. Talking from my own experience and my own opinion, of all things that I've potentially struggled with in the past, don't be afraid to talk afterwards about how you feel. Obviously, it's important to listen to your bottom, how they feel, how things are for them, but don't be afraid to be vulnerable as a top and talk about how you feel. Sometimes it might not be appropriate immediately after. I can think back to a play partner, a friend and play partner, a former play partner in the scene. We were involved in some sort of, we had a play dynamic where we spent about nearly a year really pushing our boundaries, our personal boundaries of what we've done in terms of sadism and humiliation and degradation, as well as physical pain and physical endurance. And what we used to do is we would meet up, we'd check in on each other the next day as well, of course, if we weren't spending it together. But we'd tend to meet up a few days later, 3 or 4 days later, once everything's settled down, to talk over how things were. You know, we just go, you know, let's talk over how that session went, how that play went, post aftercare, when the emotions and the body has settled down a bit. And we would say, you know, what worked for you there? How did that feel? How were you afterwards? And you know, and generally sort of do a recap. And that really helped. I think that really helped me at that stage. Hopefully it helped her as well. But that really helped me at that stage as my journey as a sadistic top. Because then that was something that I could, you know, after a few days reflection, have a conversation that you can then take away and reflect upon. And with that old chestnut of you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, you know, make sure you listen. Obviously, don't be afraid to talk about how you feel. But yeah, just, you know, don't be afraid to be vulnerable and don't be afraid to talk about how you feel. Because, you know, I can think about previously when I've done, you know, going back quite a bit, casual or swing meets where they've wanted a dom and they wanted a sadistic dom, and I would put on that whole persona. And, you know, that wouldn't drop until after they left. And then I was just kind of sat there on my own, you know, back to being me again. Just, you know, it's great to put on an act. It's great to put on a persona and slip into that role or access that aspect of you and let that aspect of you out to play. But don't be afraid to just drop it afterwards and be vulnerable is my one.
Thank you both for sharing. That's really great, actually. And thank you for being vulnerable. Yeah.
Good.
You know me, Burns. I've done a lot of growth. I'm at the point where I can quite comfortably say say on a podcast where I don't have to put a pretense on, and I can bare my soul, and I can even turn around to you and tell you how much I love and appreciate you, Burns. I've come that far.
You don't just whisper it in my ear afterwards anymore, eh?
No, I don't just whisper it in your ear afterwards anymore. Didn't think we were going to tell people about that.
Ah, well, you know, it's just a wee little present for our regular listeners, you know.
They'll be talking about us. It'll be scandalous. So, one thing I wanted to touch on is I think just we're talking about aftercare, and one thing I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you must. I say you must have. You may have. You've done extended play sessions. Have you ever done sort of maybe a very long and heavy, physically demanding play session where maybe potentially your partner may experience kind of some of the symptoms of maybe mild shock after play, like shivering, shaking, very, very cold, unable to focus, pupils dilated, stuff like that. Because I can tell you, the first few times I experienced that, I was scared shitless at the top. That really worried me, and actually it's one of the things that over the years has informed who I play with and how hard, and the connection I have with them and how well I know them, and how we build up to certain things. Obviously, because no people listening don't know your professional background, but answering as somebody who's potentially not a medical professional, how do you prepare for that risk, mitigate that risk, care for somebody in that situation? How do you prepare somebody? How do you prepare someone for, if somebody wants to play really hard and you're about to go really hard, how do you prepare them for the risks of really heavy drop, or a really heavy reaction to intense physical stimulus?
Well, I think we have, first of all, two responsibilities when starting that kind of looking into playing with someone. And depending on the activity as well, the first responsibility is to educate ourselves, is to know what it is we want to do, know how to do it, and know how to deal with the worst case outcome and how to deal with the most likely outcome. So the first responsibility is to educate ourselves. The second is then to educate the person who we want to, and hopefully, of course, wants to do it with us, and to educate them so that they can be aware. There's the term of RAC, which is the risk-aware consensual kink. And the risk-aware part is on both of you. Now, ideally, you would expect both parties to come to it with a ready awareness of what risk they want to undertake. However, as the active party, I think we have a greater burden and responsibility there to make sure that what we are thinking is the risk and what we are thinking is the activity, our partner is also thinking the same thing. If someone were to come to me and go, I want you to do a really intense fear play scene with me, I need to make sure they're thinking the same thing I'm thinking when I think of that. Our language can be very ill-defined. And we can use a lot of words that potentially different people mean very different things. And so fear play can mean very different things to very different people. For some, it's like, right, fear play. I want you to scare me. I want you to kind of push me past kind of what I think of as my kind of limit. For other people, it means I want you to shout at me while you chase me around with a stick. It can mean very different things. And so on the first level is that educate. Do we know what we're doing? Do they know what we're doing? Do we know how it's going to be done? Do I know how to do it? Do I know what's the worst case and what I do? Do I know what the most likely case is and what I do? I think that's the first level of kind of education and that being aware. The second thing to educate ourselves on is entirely that aftercare aspect. And that can be on one level dialogue with our partner, which is how do they like aftercare? What do they like in their experience? What aftercare works for them? And so we need to educate ourselves to their particular common needs. And then also be aware of, right, well, if I push them past something they're used to, what are the kind of physiological reactions I can expect? Like that shivering, that not being able to get warm, that kind of being disassociated. Right, what do I need to do there as well? And so I think those are our kind of two big responsibilities when engaging in a scene with someone. And those become even more important the more extreme the type of play we're talking about doing. And extreme doesn't always mean physical. It can mean mental. It can mean whatever is extreme for that person. For some person, perhaps, impact is not an extreme thing for them, but name calling is. And for someone else, it'd be totally the other way around. So when we say extreme type of play, it's extreme as defined, not most often by the person you're doing with, not so much by you who's doing it. So I think when it comes to aftercare, and particularly that kind of shocky aftercare thing, it absolutely is the case, right? You want to know, how do you deal with someone who's in that state, who can't verbalize their need? And for me, it normally works into a hierarchy of response. The first is purely physical. If they are cold, warm them up. If they are dissociated and they are unable to care for themselves, keep them safe. You basically physically put them in an environment where they're safe, so that mentally they can come around. And I can't engage with them mentally. I can't ask them, are you okay? I can't check they're all right and verbalize with them until they're back in that state. And so my kind of way of looking at that kind of extreme situation, it is working in a hierarchy of needs. What's the first to get them safe? How do we get them physically recovering so that their body's okay, so their mind can recover? And a big thing in that state for me is always, whatever concerns I've got don't matter. So we've been talking about that kind of top aftercare and where it's okay. For me, my top aftercare does not come until the end of the scene, and the scene does not end until they are fully recovered. And so all of it's about them at that point. All of them is just about making sure they are okay.
So let me ask you a question, and this is probably more for my own personal benefit and growth than it is for anybody else listening. It's a little bit of a selfish one, this. If I'm in a situation whereby I've been playing really hard with a partner and we've come to the end of that scene or the end of that play session, and that partner is potentially the one you can see leaning on me at the moment, is non-verbal, non-responsive. Breathing is shallow, but it's happening. There are no airways restricted. Just to set the scene, there are no airways restricted by rope or by either rope, body position, or any other apparatus. But breathing is erratic, either shallow or panty, because of their disassociated state. So actually it's more often shallow than anything else. Check the eyes, they roll back in the head. They're completely away with the fairies. In that situation, what I do is I usually leave it about 10 minutes, and then I use my voice to try and slowly guide them back to me with very, with closeness, gentleness, and it's personal preference. In a situation like that, would you be more inclined to just stay with them, keep them safe, and just totally let them come back in their own time, or would you, use gentle verbal cues to guide them back and lead them back to you?
I think the majority of cases I'd do the same as you in that. I would be verbalizing to them. I would be talking to them. I'd be letting them know it's okay, that they were, a good girl. It's all right. Nothing else is going to happen to you. You've done well. It's over. So I would be trying to reinforce that, so that when they were able to hear me, the first thing they would be hearing is kind of reassuring, consistent, kind of comforting phrases. It's also one of the reasons why I think it's very important with something like that is there's a big trust aspect. And it's why I think it's very important that you are consistent in certain aspects of your play. You almost ritualize certain aspects of it. So having certain phrases and certain ways of speaking that to the person you're playing with are always consistently when you're talking about, coming out of the scene. So you're always using the same kind of phrasings, and you never kind of try and play with it or trick them. You never kind of go, it's okay, it's all over now, it's okay, you're safe. Aha, surprise! No, really, I'm actually going to do more. It's like, no, just don't try and twist around, because what's important is that they know that when you're saying those things, they are in a safe space, that they're coming out of it, nothing else can happen, they can be comforted. And so that trust builds up in the relationship. So there is a reliability in you, the consistency in you, so that they know when they hear that it's okay.
Yeah, no, I get you. And I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you. I think I've experienced it a few times where I've maybe tried to gently coax them back, maybe to a partner back a little too quickly by going, can you, try and elicit a response perhaps, because maybe there's been concern about the fact how non-responsive they are, how shallow the breathing is, etc. And then I will, but that's the thing. Sometimes when you're in these situations, you want to. It can be tricky, and it can be. I think it can be tricky decisions for a top to make, and a lot of responsibility, and quite rightly so. When you're in a position where you do very much care, and if you don't care for your bottom, and I don't know what you're doing from the first place, but you're in a position where you do very much care for your bottom and what's best for them, and you can become slightly concerned because of maybe it might not be that they're non-responsive and their eyes are rolled back. It might be the sobbing or or anything, and you can become concerned, and through that concern, maybe you react in unintentionally and maybe not the best course of action. I suppose it comes from that living and learning, and so long as nobody loses an eye, so long as actually there is no real harm done, and we learn from those mistakes like you were saying earlier.
Yeah, it's entirely possible we won't do it perfectly. That's okay. You make mistakes, try and make new mistakes each time. I think hopefully also it's someone you don't jump straight into that kind of play with most people. You build up a relationship, it builds up over time, the intensity builds up over time, which also means hopefully you have more and more experience of giving that particular partner aftercare and learning their particular mechanisms as well. There's a great deal of time invested in building up your play.
I think it's also interesting that, as you mentioned, that because obviously there's certain things where a partner will become non-verbal or whatever. And I was at a rope workshop not too long ago where the class was cautioned against asking too many questions, because they were saying if you're constantly, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? You interrupt the headspace that your partner's trying to get into. So what should be a nice scene, as it were, quickly becomes an interrogation scene, which is not necessarily what you're trying to do. And obviously that would kind of apply to aftercare as well. At the end of it, you don't want to be at someone too much, so I think that's really helpful advice.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. You don't want to be, you're not trying to make sure they're okay to reassure yourself. I think sometimes you're going, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? It's actually you're worried and you're trying to get them to reassure you. So sometimes there is a self-awareness in understanding what it is that you're trying to get, I suppose. And if what you're trying to get is making sure that you're okay because they're okay, that's very different to making sure they're okay, because their needs at that time might not be to make sure that they're all right. So I think you're quite right. There's not kind of badgering them with like, are you okay? That's why I normally have almost like a monologue that goes on, just reaffirming, reassuring, positive statements that aren't questions, that don't require them to feed back to me. It's me just telling them things so that they can stay in that state and just have kind of a positive dialogue ongoing that they can engage with when they want to, if they want to. Normally what I'll do is I'll wait for eye contact, so when they can hold eye contact with me and they're paying attention to what I'm saying, and then I'll ask something like, do you think you could have something to drink? Do you think you could have some chocolates? So I'll ask them, do you think you could do this? And so it won't be, are you okay? Are you all right? Was that okay? It's a very kind of soft, gently, and that's only after they've kind of started to come around a little bit. I think you're right, especially during a scene, it can be very disruptive to constantly have to be reassuring the person doing the thing that it's okay. And I suppose that's an entire conversation about the value of safe words and how it allows you to invest in a scene emotionally as well, because you have, hopefully as a top, you have confidence in your bottom's ability to safe word. And so you can invest into the scene without needing to be double checking on those things, because you have it as a backup. You always want to be aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, that's within the limits and the agreed consent of who you're doing it with. But you've always got like an emergency backup in case you miss something. And for the bottom, hopefully, you can just give yourself over to the experience, but also have that security as a safe net, saying that you can stop it if you need to. But otherwise, you can just enjoy the roller coaster.
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to steal that off you, because I think, looking down at partner resting on me, I think I tend to use, do you need a drink, or would you like it? Once they're kind of a bit, once they're verbal and they've started to look around the room a bit and sort of sit up or prop themselves up, or consciously shift their body in some way. I will then say, you ready for a drink? I think that's probably what I say. Would you like a drink? But I think, that's a good one. Do you feel like you could have a drink now? Do you feel like you could drink now? What I tend to do is it's the same sort of reassurance in the same tone. I'm here, letting them know they're not alone, but, that I'm proud of them, that they've done really well, and that I'm looking after them, they're safe. And then after a while, I tend to do, and I'm absolutely going to hear if you think, well, I should be maybe doing this differently, or if you feel that it's ill-advised, because, you live and learn. But then after a while, I will tend to do what I want you to do is I want you to listen to my voice and just slowly follow my voice back, just very gently. And I'll lead, very, very gently lead them back like that. Not force them back, but when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I'm right here. And until you're ready, you just listen to my voice and follow that, and sort of try and gently lead them back when they're ready to be led, rather than get the hell up, wake up, move, go, have a drink of water, hydrate yourself, woman, which is obviously not the approved method.
Yeah, what you're describing in many ways is effectively kind of how you lead somebody out of trance. And so it is that kind of follow my voice back when you're ready. It's that slow kind of stepping away from one state into another. So yeah, there's absolutely that kind of language is very kind of de-trancing, deprogramming language, which is great because it does give people a slow rise of consciousness. And as we talked about, a lot of this is about altered states of consciousness. And I think there's a lot we can do in scene and also before the scene that helps set the groundwork for that journey out the other side as well. And by engaging with people positively, by being proactive about consent, by engaging kind of yes, no, maybe let's, we can do a lot of the work that lets them feel safe with us so they can feel unsafe with us and then feel safe again. Because we're going through a journey, and setting the groundwork early by being kind of good, conversational, aware sadists who will discuss these issues with them means that they can have a certain degree of confidence going into the scene and trust in us, so that when they're then coming out the other side, that confidence and trust is still there to help them come out the other side and feel secure as well.
What I was going to ask you, Will, is during your time in the scene, you must have either have heard, I don't want to say horror stories, some of them might be horror stories, occasions where things haven't gone well for the bottom, either during play or afterwards. In your experience, do you think the bigger risk from sadistic play comes from physical harm or comes from emotional or psychological harm or trauma?
Well, first of all, I hesitate to speak on others' behalves in this way because, of course, I can only speak from what I've seen other people go through. And so I hesitate to speak on the behalf of those who have gone through these things. But I suppose I can speak from the sense of what have I seen. And I have seen people for whom play has gone wrong, and they've just left the scene because of it. They have never been able to reconcile what happened with the scene ever being safe for them again. And so from that, I would assume there was a great deal of mental harm done. And while physically we may recover, what we learn and what we feel safe with can change forever. And I think there is a real shame that the community bears for those people who come to it because they want to explore that part of themselves, because it's supposed to be a community where they can explore that part of themselves, and they be so hurt and damaged by something that they have to shut that part of themselves off for their own safety. And that is a failing of the community, because for whatever reason, we either allow perpetuation of kind of risky people or encourage risky play, or fail to educate and protect newer members.
Burns, what are your thoughts on you know, what have been your takeaways, mate, from the conversation so far? As somebody who isn't necessarily as into sadistic play as, say, I am, or some of our listeners might be, what have you, as a sort of a non-masochistic, mostly non-masochistic rope bottom, taken away from this evening? I'm quite interested to hear that.
I think it's been quite interesting to bust a few of the myths around sadism. And if you'll indulge me a wee story, Will was talking about how some play, particularly fear play, will look very different to different people. And it's actually at one of the recent rope workshops I went to, I was gifted a chance to, and I use those words particularly, gifted a chance to go beyond a couple of limits I'd previously set, in that some of the people in the class had been asking about breath play. Now, this is something that was previously on my never list. Right, I'm never, ever going to go near it. And this is not to knock people that do. Please don't think that I am. But it was just something that I was particularly frightened of. Now, one of the things that was mentioned during this workshop is that breath play takes many forms. And it's not just choking someone until they're unconscious. You know, it's not just choking someone until they're unconscious, you know. So what actually happened towards the end of the scene, my partner said, do you mind if I put some rope on your neck? And again, bear in mind, previously this is my never, ever, don't do this ever. But because we'd done a particular exercise at the workshop related to this, I said, oh, okay, I'll try it. You know, if I don't like it, well, then I can always say so after, you know. And I think it said a lot for how far I've come in my journey with my partner, that we trusted each other to be able to do that and have that work in the scene. And while I can't deny the psychological effect it had on me during the scene, I didn't feel dangerously at risk, if that makes sense. I was frightened because of what that would, you know, just what it represented, if you like. But it kind of opened my eyes a wee bit, if that makes sense. You know, that some things, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, oh, right now it's my favourite thing and I want to do it every time, but something that is gone from never, ever, ever, ever to this is an interesting thing to play with. And I am confident in my partner's ability to do that safely and to look after me. So after the scene, I know that we will have that moment where I can reassure her that it's been okay and I'm fine, and she can reassure me, say, right, okay, well, you know, I'll get you a drink and, you know, whatever, and make sure you're okay. And it was really quite a thing. So a lot of what we've spoken about tonight kind of resonates in that kind of way. And I think it's kind of why the discussion on aftercare was so critical, and it's very important. And I think a lot of the stuff we've mentioned, I think even people who aren't necessarily considering themselves as a sadist or considering themselves as being into that, you know, you might look at it and say, well, it's not necessarily just this one thing. It might not be, oh, I'm not into impact, but it doesn't matter, because I can still enjoy something else that might incorporate some of this, if that makes sense. You know, I'm not limited to this one tiny corner.
Yeah, I think the topic of this conversation was sadism. So I think that's very much what we have tried to stay within the bounds of. But it has to be highlighted that is, I think, as I kind of touched on a little bit, that is a name for a school of methodology. And there is a lot more out there. There's a lot more to many people have got their varied interests, and they will fall under different things. A lot of what I do falls under the DS dynamic, the dominant submissive dynamic. And that's a lot of what I teach as well. There's also all the rope fun and games, but mostly the consistent thing through all of it is I have a fascination and I derive pleasure and enjoyment from provoking sensation and response in other people. And that comes in a lot of forms, one of which that we've been chatting about tonight is sadism.
Yeah, and many of us sadists, when I say many of us, all of us are human, and humans are multifaceted, and I don't know, maybe Will is just like this pure sadist, built on nothing but laughter around other people's suffering and joy at others' pain, be it emotional, physical. But because I can only speak for myself, so maybe he is. I am a daddy dom in my other relationship that I'm in. I like to think I'm a caring owner to my slave, who is also my partner in terms of our sadist and masochistic adventures and endeavors together. We might be sadists, but it's not all we are. We are caring human beings with other aspects to us. On the topic of inducing a response and a reaction from people, I'm hoping that you're going to stick around for our last little sections so that I can see your response and your reaction to maybe a couple of entries from the encyclopedia of unusual sexual practices. Our regular listeners will know that this is a bizarre book that I found, I believe, in an Oxfam charity bookshop several decades back on my lunch break. And for the most part of having it, it's been gathering dust. But when we started doing this podcast, it found its moment. It found its calling. So we'll have a couple of extracts of that, and then I've got a short reading as well, which is maybe not a permanent replacement for Burns' outstanding Jock or Naughty, but we just thought we'd maybe switch it up a bit and do something different. I'll explain what that is just before I start the reading, but if you want a couple of extracts from the encyclopedia, I feel now's a good time. So, just to explain this book to you, Will, like I say, I found it a long time ago in a second-hand bookshop, and it's got some bizarre entries in it. I mean, we've had all sorts. I listened to our back catalogue of episodes. It's too much to go into, to be fair, but some very, very weird fetishes or sexual practices. Some of the stuff in here is just a bit weird. Some of it, I mean, I've just flicked through vasectomies in here, so spermicide. Bisexualism's in here, so is bestiality, but it just says see zoophilia. There's all sorts in here. It's cocaine's in here. It's intriguing. It is scary. It is a segment that our viewers or listeners have come to know and love. I say come to know and love. We haven't had that many complaints about it, so we keep doing it. So, if you're ready.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to learning.
Pygophilia? Have you ever heard of Pygophilia, chaps? It's about Pygophilia. Philia attachment to.
Is it a sexual attraction Northerners have to pie shops?
No, it's not. I mean, if it's about PIE, Pygophilia, then I can see, but it's PYGO. And the pygo bit comes from py. It's about PYGE or pyge for buttocks, and the philia is attachment to. And it's specifically to do with the kissing of buttocks and arousal from the kissing of buttocks.
That doesn't sound too out there. That sounds positively normal.
It does, doesn't it? It's not that bizarre at all. Sadism's in here, actually. Sadism came in here, but I think we've probably touched on that. I'll tell you one thing it does say, and I want to ask you if you agree or disagree with this. I think it's a long entry. It's about 2 pages long. But it has a line in here, Will, that says, consensual S&M and sadism are as different as normal sex compared to rape. True sadists are not concerned whether their victim has a pleasurable response. People who play consensual S&M are extremely concerned. Now, this book has got some dodgy crap in it. and it's not a Bible, and there's a lot of crap in here that I disagree with, and I'm using the word crap because there is really some stuff in here I disagree with. But what would you say to that sentence, in your opinion?
I would say that we have a language issue there. I think they're using a very particular definition of sadist, and it's not the kind of, I don't believe that is any longer the common usage term of sadism, especially when we're talking about within the BDSM context. So I think they're talking about sadism more as like a psychological diagnosis rather than the way we're using it to refer to a school of activities or a person who derives pleasure. Because for us, it is sadism within BDSM. So straight away, we break their first distinction straight away by saying sadism within BDSM.
Yeah, I would agree. And this book actually tends to use, on occasion, clinical definitions for things.
It seems a bit odd, seeing as I'm pretty sure that book was originally published in 1992. You'd have think they'd have moved on, in some of their opinions, but there we go, 1992. Mind you, I think it was actually legal for men to rape their wives in the UK until 1993 or 1991 or something like that. So I'm really not surprised that it's full of shite, given it was 1992.
No, absolutely. I'll tell you what, I'm going to do one more. We'll do one more and then we'll have a story. There's a chap in here. Are either of you familiar with Leopold von Sacher-Masoch?
Yes, it said that he had a quote that was, "An intelligent man never repeats himself." So that's me fucked.
Oh, straight on it. Who was he? What was he famous for, other than that quote, perhaps?
The birth of masochism. That's where the word masochism comes from.
It was indeed. Yeah, he was the author of Venus in Furs, if you're familiar with either the book or the 1970s sexploitation movie, I believe.
I have read the book. I have read Venus in Furs. It was an interesting book. But I find these early explorations of BDSM quite fascinating, along with there's another classic French one, The Story of O. And I think The Story of O and Venus in Furs were both very interesting kind of form-setting books for when people were trying to construct an idea of a kink identity. So I think they're very fascinating within the kind of historical context of where they sit.
I do need to correct myself, or I've just been corrected, so I need to add that correction. Venus in Furs wasn't a 70s sexploitation movie. It was actually 1967. So just to get that sort of just a little bit closer to the truth. Not read the book.
Possibly also getting confused by the song by Velvet Underground, which I think was in the 70s.
Yes, so he gets an entry in here. I don't know, we've done D. I don't know if if we had Desard under D. I don't remember seeing Desard when we did D. Have you read much Desard?
Not so much. I always felt Desard was a bit of a try-hard. He reminds me of some of Aleister Crowley's poetry, which was, I'm definitely going to try and write something shocking about poo.
Yes.
And it's just like, you're just reaching and trying to be controversial. So yeah, I not wildly enamoured.
I think it's often said that Crowley was reaching around.
Yes, very true. I think Crowley's collection of poems called White Stains is probably one of the most adolescent attempts at being provocative that I've read in a very long time. I'm pretty sure it's because he was trying to sleep with Oscar Wilde.
I mean, I've found some of Desard's stuff really interesting. Conversation between a dying man and a priest, etc. I found some really interesting pieces. Then I tried to read 120 Days of Sodom, which is just shock value for shock value, and I actually felt dirty and needed to get the book out of my house before I even got very far into it.
Well, I'm sure that definitely would have pleased him to know.
Yeah, well, I would have been over the moon with that. The fact that someone bought it and then was desperate to get it out of their house.
I wonder what he would have made of James Joyce.
Who knows? Thing is, Joyce wasn't really out to shock because those letters were private, weren't they? They were supposed to be private. So is quite different, whereas Desaad was clearly out to shock and cause controversy and to sort of really, land that punch. Joyce's professional work is a completely different tone and taste to his private letters. So who knows?
Also, even in his private letters, he routinely expressed great shame for what he'd said. And I'm sure there's probably a lot to unpack there, but that's probably a conversation for another time.
Talking about literary giants, I have got an absolute gem to round off tonight. I don't think I want to name the author, or I don't even think I want to name the book, to be fair. It's just I don't feel it's on, especially because of my views on it and the potential for me to mock this book, and I don't want to publicly lambast the author. It's just not fair. It's not on. So I'll describe it as a book that was gifted to me and is written in the last couple of decades, I believe, and it is meant to be authored by a man in his 50s, and this person is an impact top of types based in London, a professional impact top.
For legal reasons, the author will be known as Giles Corrin. It's not, but we're just going to say that it was written by Giles Corrin for humour value.
But it's meant to be the accounts of a professional impact top operating in London. Will, you're currently based in London?
Actually, I'm currently based in Nottingham. I'm afraid I bounce around so bloody much, it's impossible to keep track of me. I'm still in London plenty. Perhaps I know who it is.
Well, I think if more of this is wanted at a later date, what we will do is maybe carry on the story, but doing it in snippets. Now, let me set the scene. This first snippet is from near the front of the book. This gentleman has decided he wants to be a professional impact top within the London scene. He comes to this with no kink experience, for what it seems in the book, and is a chap in the tail end of his midlife. He's slowly moving on, but he's not old. And he's decided this is what he wants to do, and this is how he's going to earn a living, and he's going to please people. And he's decided the best thing to do is to go to a female dominatrix and experience what he wants to dish out firsthand. So the first encounter in the book isn't with him as the impact top, but with the dominatrix that he has paid £50 50 British pounds for this session. And I will start a little way into the scene, if I may. Stand against the door and put your hands flat against it, she ordered. I had no idea what was coming next. Right, young man, I'm going to count to 10. 1. What felt like a leather paddle cracked against my buttocks. I winced audibly. The pain was intense, coming in waves with each stroke. Slowly and very deliberately she counted to 10. My buttocks were burning, but this was a pleasurable burn. Nothing like my first experience with the cane, but I still had that to come. I was very much aware of how much the sting lingered in the immediate aftermath of the stroke, but equally I realised how quickly it disappeared, just in time for the next stroke to land. She was taking her time. That was the key. She was in total control. She had already threatened me with extra strokes for any slight act of disobedience or not carrying out her instructions to the letter. Turn around. I faced her. Right, young man. Now that's a reach. Right, young man. Your warm-up is over now. It's time for the serious punishment. Oh my God, was she serious? I had no way of knowing. She was in control. Get those trousers and pants out of the way. I stumbled out of them. I was naked except for my shirt, tie, socks and shoes. Oh, so he's mostly dressed, to be fair. I was naked except for my shirt, tie, socks and shoes.
How did he take his trousers off with his shoes still on?
Really undignified shuffle, and there's no way of a slim or straight fit. That 55-year-old man, M&S trousers.
Could have been wearing bell bottoms, maybe.
That baggy 55-year-old man, M&S trousers that just sort of slip off. The nurse needs to get him off in case he has a fall. Sorry, that's really cruel of me. She produced a tawse, which is a leather strap with a split end around 2 inches wide and 18 in length. It looked very mean indeed. Right, let me explain what's going to happen. I'm going to give you 20 strokes with the tawse. You will count each one and thank me for it. If you forget to either count or thank me, I shall repeat the stroke and it won't count. Is that clear? When I've finished with you, you'll bend over the table and receive 12 strokes with the cane, which again you will count and thank me for. Then you will be able to get dressed and go home. £50 well spent. I will expect you back here in 3 months' time and will expect to see a major improvement. You've got a puzzled look upon your face, Will. Is there something I can help you with?
Well, okay, so he's paid 50 quid for basically a 15-minute spanking, and he's having a follow-up with him in 3 months where he's expecting an improvement on what? His ability to count to 20 or to take his trousers off by keeping his shoes on?
I would imagine his ability to take his shoes off first like a normal human being. So this was it. Time to see exactly what I was made of. I was, by now, feeling quite heady and confident that I could take it. I leant forward against the door, resting my weight against my palms, my feet slightly apart, aware of my balls dangling between my legs. As the three of us move slowly to 50 and beyond, this is something we'll become more aware of ourselves. You know, we have a shocked look on our face, but we're all around 15 to 20 years younger than this guy. You know, it's going to happen to the best of us. Let's have those feet further apart. Keep going. I shifted my feet to the point where I was a good 2 feet apart. I felt very exposed. When you are ready, name of person, I took a sharp intake of breath. I mean, obviously it's not his real name. I mean, who would put their real name to this tripe? It's like saying that you get self-published on Amazon. 1. Please, Mum! There was a loud crack of leather against flesh. Wasn't he meant to thank her? 1. Please, Mum. He's ballsed up, hasn't he? Either in writing... Yeah. No.
Yeah, no, he's messed up already. Yeah, this one doesn't count. This one doesn't count then. He's going to have to do it again.
I winced, held my breath again. Thank you, Mum. 2. Please. 2. Please, Mum. Oh, he's doing his please. Oh, he's very well mannered. Although, manners count for nothing if it's not what you've been told to do. How would you react to your bottom if you told them to thank you for each one and they said please and thank you?
Well, you'd correct them and start again. I mean, it's not complicated.
Yeah, no, it's not, is it? I don't think he's getting value for money here.
Well, he's paid 50 quid. I don't know a single one of my dominatrix friends in London who charges 50 quid. Maybe he got like a Groupon voucher or something.
Groupon voucher? Do you know any dominatrix who put vouchers up on Groupon that maybe at times of year where it's a bit slower?
I don't, but I kind of wish they did now, actually. That would be absolutely outstanding. Family experience, dominatrix, 50 quid.
It could bring in a new customer base that wouldn't normally explore that. It could be if you get them in with a £50 Groupon, and then get them back 3 months later, say, or sooner would be a better business model, wouldn't it? To pay the full amount,
I think a lot of pro-doms stopped using Groupon for CBT sessions because they'd offer 2 for 1 on ball busting, and people were just confused. Is it 2 sessions or each bollock?
Very good, Burns. Very, very good. Basically, they get up to 12, and if they've had the spanking, it's all been and gone, and it just sounds like a very dull experience, to be honest. I know £50 is very cheap. I say very cheap. I know that reputable professionals with a decent client base do not charge £50 for a session. However, I still think he's been done out of his money. That's a bad session. If someone's paid £50 for a session, you think they've been done out of their money, then really, and if he was using it as an experience to base his sessions on, you can see how this book is going to go downhill.
It doesn't inspire confidence.
No. I think what we'll do is we'll probably pick some of that up on the next session. I'm going to thank you once again, because I really am that appreciative of you making the time, in your schedule to come on this evening. And just, ask both of you, because this is what we usually do at the end. Do you have any sort of final thoughts on the conversation we've had? Any little gems to leave us with? Or as well, we're going to always put any events or anywhere people are performing, or any of their services or workshops, etc. That always goes into the link. Likewise, if you've got anything to plug at the moment, now would be the ideal time.
Yeah, sure. I've got a couple of things coming up. A few things that are public now, a few things that are still being booked. Next workshop that's public and is available for booking right now is December 6th. That's happening in Nottingham. And that's at the Mind Play for the East Midlands. And my partner and I are doing a talk on the psychology of belief. So it's actually all about how you can emotionally and mentally invest into a scene. How do you get past that? Oh, I'm just in the bedroom with my partner with a pair of fluffy handcuffs. How do you actually make it intense? How do you make people believe in what's going on? And that's a big part of what I do, especially in fear play, is making someone believe in what you're saying. Like, how do you make a threat actually threatening rather than just sound like a hollow threat? So that's something that's coming up, and that's available now. Otherwise, what we are booking as well is 2 workshops, which will be based down in London, actually. Just grabbing the dates of those now, because they're not public yet, so you can't book them, but they are coming up. And that is going to be in April of next year. We're just starting to book out the spring. So April 2nd and 3rd. April 2nd, my partner and I are doing our talk on DS, which is called How to Train Your Human. And so that talk is lots about the psychology of training and DS dynamics. So how you actually build a relationship that allows for not just kind of play, but also effectively long-term behavioral changes as part of a 24/7 DS dynamic. So it's quite an intense workshop on DS. And then on the 3rd of April, we have our now somewhat infamous Introduction to Enhanced Interrogation Technique. And that is limited to 10 couples. It's not available for booking yet. That is the first one that's going to happen next year. There'll be a second one in the autumn of next year, and that'll be based up probably in Nottingham or Birmingham. But if you're on the Anatomy Studio mailing list, keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, you can always keep an eye on my FetLife profile as well. But it does sell out very quickly. It is limited to 10 couples. It is a full day intensive introduction that covers, it's a busy day, it's intense, it's a lot of work, but it does give people a really solid grounding on what and how to do enhanced interrogation as a kink play.
And did you say that both of those, the spring and the autumn one of that, would be held possibly up in Nottingham or Birmingham?
The spring one, those are both happening. The How to Train Your Human and the Introduction to Enhanced Interrogation Techniques on the 2nd and 3rd of April are both happening down at Anatomy Studios in London. So those are both happening in London. The second Enhanced Interrogation Techniques of next year will be held up in Birmingham or Nottingham. It'll be in the Midlands, so that's not booked yet.
I look forward to hopefully meeting you in the flesh in around April of next year.
Absolutely brilliant, good. Should be good fun.
I've got somebody enthusiastically nodding at my feet at the moment, so I will have to bag tickets this time and have to get on there to see that and be part of that.
If you're on the Anatomy Studio mailing list, you should hopefully hear about it as soon as it becomes available.
Amazing stuff. Burns, for yourself?
As always, keep it kinky, keep it fun, and just communicate with your partner. That's the best way to get it done.
Thank you both for coming on, and a huge thank you once again to our ever-growing, albeit slowly, listener base. Thank you for keep coming back and listening to our episodes and following the evolution of the show, the evolution of the podcast. Thank you for the positive feedback and the constructive feedback that we get from our viewers or listeners, should I say. Don't forget that you can connect with either myself or Burns on FL Spy Sideburns on FL.
Space Sideburns, like the whiskey.
And myself, Cool Hand Ads, on FL, Insta. We welcome constructive feedback. We welcome anybody who wants to come on if they've got a unique experience they'd like to share with us. Drop one of us the message. Alternatively, there is the FL group for varying degrees, a BDSM podcast. You're welcome to join us there. You can follow us on all major streaming platforms. Hit us up. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Thank you and good night.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Have a great night. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Indeed. Good night.